Imagine standing in the center of a crowded square, the sun beating down on your neck as thousands of eyes fixate on you. You aren't there for a celebration. You are there because you broke a law you didn't even know existed, and the penalty is something so imaginative, so visceral, and so incredibly dark that it would make a modern horror movie look like a bedtime story. Throughout history, humanity has been remarkably creative. We've built pyramids, mapped the stars, and mastered the seas. But there is a flip side to our brilliance. Across every major ancient civilization, from the sun-drenched sands of Egypt to the misty forests of northern Europe, humans have spent an equal amount of time perfecting the art of the ultimate penalty. They didn't just want to remove troublemakers, they wanted to send a message that would echo through the generations. Today, we are peeling back the curtain on the most intense, creative, and bone-chilling methods used by our ancestors to keep the peace. We begin in the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. You might have heard of the phrase, an eye for an eye, but for the Babylonians, this wasn't just a metaphor. King Hammurabi's code was one of the first written legal systems in human history, and it was absolutely uncompromising. If you were a builder and you constructed a house so poorly that it collapsed and caused the loss of the owner's family, the law dictated that your own family would face the exact same fate. But it got much more specific and grimmer. One of the favored methods for those who committed theft during a fire was to be thrown directly into the flames of that same fire. They believed in a poetic, if incredibly harsh, form of cosmic balance. If you were caught stealing from a burning building, the building became your final destination. There was no trial by jury here. There was only the cold, hard logic of the stone pillars where these laws were carved for all to see. Moving further south into the land of the pharaohs, ancient Egypt had a reputation for being a structured and divine society. But if you crossed the pharaoh or disturbed the sacred order of Ma'at, the consequences were legendary. While they were masters of preservation through mummification, they were also masters of the opposite. For the most serious crimes, such as treason or tomb robbing, the Egyptians practiced something called the Great Overturning. The offender would be staked to the ground in the middle of a desert wasteland. But they wouldn't just leave you there. They would cover your body in honey and milk, attracting every desert insect for miles. Under the blistering sun, the person would remain pinned to the earth as nature slowly reclaimed what was left of them. The goal wasn't just the end of life. It was the total erasure of the physical body. Since the Egyptians believed you needed your physical form to enter the afterlife, this was considered the ultimate spiritual erasing. You weren't just gone from this world, you were denied the next one. Now, let's cross the Mediterranean to ancient Greece. We often think of them as the fathers of philosophy and democracy, but they had a dark side that would make even the most hardened warrior flinch. Perhaps the most infamous device ever conceived was the brazen bull. Designed by a metalworker named Perilos for the tyrant Phalaris, it was a hollow bronze statue of a bull. The condemned would be locked inside, and a fire would be lit underneath. As the metal heated up, the space inside became an oven. But here is the truly twisted part. The bull was engineered with a complex system of pipes and whistles in the nose. When the person inside screamed, the sound was transformed through the pipes to sound like the furious bellowing of a real bull. To the onlookers, it seemed like the statue had come to life. It was a spectacle of sound and heat that turned the most tragic moment of a person's life into a piece of dark performance art. Even the tyrant who commissioned it was reportedly so disgusted by the inventor's pride in the device that he tested it out on the inventor himself. As we head further north into the territories of the Germanic and Celtic tribes, the methods of punishment took on a much more ritualistic and naturalistic tone. These people lived in a world where the gods were in the trees, the rivers, and the bogs. For those who broke the social contracts or failed the tribe, the bog was the final answer. We have found remarkably preserved remains in the peat bogs of northern Europe that tell a chilling story. These individuals were often led out into the marshy wetlands, tied down with hazel branches, and submerged into the cold, oxygen-free water. The chemistry of the bog would essentially pickle the body, preserving their skin and even their last meals for thousands of years. It wasn't just a disposal, it was a sacrifice to the earth. They were literally being returned to the mud from which the tribe believed life began. The silence of the bog served as a permanent prison. But if we are talking about sheer scale and theatricality, no one did it quite like the Roman Empire. The Romans loved a show, and they integrated their legal system into their entertainment. While the Colosseum is famous for gladiators, it was also the site of some of the most elaborate punishments in history. They practiced something called damnatio ad bestias, or being condemned to the beasts. This wasn't just being tossed into a leopard's den. They would often recreate famous myths where the protagonist met a tragic end. The prisoner would be dressed as a mythological figure and forced to play the part in a real-life reenactment that ended with the arrival of lions, bears, or tigers. For the Roman citizens in the stands, it was a way to see justice served while being entertained. However, for those who committed the highest crime of all, parricide, or the act of harming one's own father, the Romans had a much more specific and psychological punishment. It was called the pona coli. The offender would be sewn into a large leather sack along with a live dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack would then be tossed into the Tiber River. The sheer terror of being trapped in a confined space with panicked animals as you sank into the depths was designed to be a living nightmare before the end. Across the ocean in the Americas, the Aztecs were perfecting their own brand of ritualized justice. For the Aztecs, the world was a fragile place that required constant nourishment to keep the sun rising and the rain falling. While many are familiar with their large-scale sacrifices, their internal judicial punishments were equally intense. If a person was caught in a serious act of deception or theft from a temple, they might face the ritual of the flaying. This was deeply tied to their god Sipe Totec. The idea was that out of the old skin, new life grows, much like a seed husking. However, for the individual involved, it was a process of being meticulously separated from their own exterior while still breathing. This skin would then be worn by a priest for 20 days as a symbol of renewal. It is a concept that is almost impossible for the modern mind to grasp, where the most extreme physical experience was seen as a necessary service to the cosmos. If we travel east to ancient China, we find a civilization that was highly organized, bureaucratic, and extremely creative with their penalties. The 5 punishments were a staple of the legal code for centuries. While some involved branding or permanent marking, the more severe ones were designed to be as prolonged as possible. One of the most feared was the lingqi, often referred to as the slow process. This was reserved for the most heinous crimes against the state or family. The goal was to remove small portions of the individual over a long period, sometimes lasting hours or even days. The practitioners were so skilled that they could keep a person conscious through the entire ordeal. It was a masterpiece of biological survival being used against the person, turning their own body's resilience into a tool for extended suffering. This wasn't just about ending a life. It was about the total disintegration of the person's dignity and physical form in the most public way possible. In ancient India, the use of animals in the legal system took a massive turn. We often think of elephants as gentle giants, but in the Maurya Empire and beyond, they were trained as the ultimate instruments of execution. An elephant is an incredibly intelligent creature, and they could be trained to perform specific tasks. If the judge wanted a quick end, the elephant would be trained to step on the offender's head. But if the crime was more severe, the elephant could be instructed to break limbs one by one, or to toss the person around like a rag doll. There are accounts of elephants wearing blades on their tusks to perform their duties with even more precision. It was a display of power that showed the state not only controlled the people, but controlled the very forces of nature itself. Returning to Europe during the early Middle Ages, which grew out of the ruins of the Roman Empire, we see the rise of the ordeal. This was a form of justice based on the idea that the divine would intervene to save the innocent. One of the most common was the ordeal of hot water. A person accused of a crime would have to reach into a pot of boiling water to retrieve a stone. Their arm would then be bandaged. After 3 days, the bandages were removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, it was seen as a sign from the heavens that the person was innocent. If the wound was infected, they were found guilty and faced further consequences. There was also the ordeal of the cold water, where a person was tied up and dropped into a pool. If they floated, they were seen as being rejected by the water because of their guilt. If they sank, they were innocent, though they had to be pulled out quickly to survive. It was a system where your survival literally depended on a miracle or the state of your immune system. In the Viking Age, the Norsemen had a reputation for being some of the most feared warriors on the planet, and their punishments reflected a culture obsessed with honor and blood. While historians debate the frequency of its use, The legend of the blood eagle remains one of the most chilling concepts in history. The process involved the offender being placed face down while their ribs were separated from the spine and folded outwards to resemble wings. It was said that the lungs were then pulled through the opening to flutter as the person took their final breaths. Whether it was done frequently or was a literary device used to scare their enemies, the very idea of it served as a powerful deterrent. In a culture where how you met your end determined your place in the afterlife, the blood eagle was the most shameful and excruciating way to go. Moving into the Byzantine Empire, they had a particular obsession with physical modification that didn't necessarily result in the end of life but made sure you could never rule again. They practiced something called rhinocoleurea, or the cutting off of the nose. This was often done to deposed emperors or political rivals. The logic was that an emperor had to be physically perfect to represent the image of heaven on earth. By mutilating the nose, the person was effectively disqualified from ever holding power again. One emperor, Justinian II, actually had this done to him, was exiled, and then managed to come back, get a gold nose made, and reclaim his throne. His story is the exception, however, as most people who suffered this lived the rest of their lives as outcasts, a walking reminder of their failure and the mercy of the new ruler. In ancient Persia, the kings were known for their absolute power and their unique methods of dealing with rebels. One of the most legendary and quite frankly stomach-churning methods was scaphism, also known as the boats. The person would be placed inside a hollowed-out log or between two boats, with only their head and limbs sticking out. They were then force-fed milk and honey until they developed severe internal issues. More honey would be smeared on their face and eyes to attract insects. The boat would then be left to float on a stagnant pond. Over the course of days or weeks, the person would slowly succumb to the environment and the tiny creatures that moved in. It is perhaps one of the most drawn-out and psychologically taxing methods ever recorded, designed to make the victim wish for the end long before it actually arrived. As we look across all these cultures, a pattern begins to emerge. These punishments were rarely about the individual who committed the crime. They were about the people watching. In a world without mass media, the public square was the television of the ancient world. The state used these displays to project a sense of absolute control. When you saw the brazen bull or the blood eagle, you weren't just seeing a person being punished. You were seeing the power of the king, the pharaoh, or the emperor. You were seeing what happened when the order of the world was disturbed. In ancient Japan, the concept of honor led to the development of seppuku, or ritual suicide. While this was often a way for a samurai to maintain his honor in the face of defeat, it was also used as a legal punishment. If a noble committed a crime, they were often allowed the privilege of ending their own life rather than being disposed of by a common executioner. It was a deeply ritualized process, involving a specific short blade and a second person ready to perform a swift strike to end the suffering. It showed a society that valued the internal state of the person even in their final moments, turning a penalty into a final act of will. The Mongols, under Genghis Khan and his successors, had a very specific rule about royal blood. They believed that spilling royal blood on the ground would bring bad luck or offend the earth. So, when they had to punish a rival noble or a captured king, they had to be creative. They would often wrap the person in a large heavy rug and then have horses stampede over them, or they would pour molten silver into the eyes and ears of the offender. This way the person was dealt with, but their blood never touched the soil. It's a fascinating look at how religious and superstitious beliefs could shape the way even the most violent acts were carried out. Interestingly, the ancient Hebrews had a system that, while seemingly harsh, included many layers of protection. While stoning is the most commonly cited punishment, the Jewish legal texts, the Mishnah and the Talmud, laid out incredibly high bars for evidence. For someone to face the ultimate penalty, there had to be two witnesses who not only saw the act but also warned the person beforehand that what they were doing was a crime. If the Council of Judges, the Sanhedrin, issued more than one such sentence in 7 years, they were considered a murderous court. When the penalty did happen, it was designed to be swift. For certain crimes, they used a method involving molten lead, which was intended to be as instantaneous as possible, reflecting a desire to follow the law without unnecessary cruelty. As we venture into the tropical reaches of ancient Southeast Asia, particularly in regions that are now Thailand and Vietnam, we find more instances of the use of elephants. However, they also utilize the environment in other ways. For certain crimes, Individuals were placed in large wicker baskets that were then kicked around by teams of people or animals, or they were subjected to the cage where they would be suspended in the heat of the central market. The humidity and the tropical sun were tools just as much as any blade or rope. Throughout history, the common thread is the human imagination. We have always been a species of builders and creators, but our ability to imagine the worst for one another is a dark mirror to our ability to imagine the best. These ancient civilizations didn't see themselves as cruel. They saw themselves as just. They believed they were maintaining the balance of the universe, satisfying the gods, or protecting the community from chaos. To them, a gruesome punishment was a necessary fence around a civilized society. When we look back on these methods today, it's easy to feel a sense of superiority. We have moved toward more humane systems, focusing on rehabilitation and the protection of human rights. But studying these ancient ways gives us a profound look into the psychology of our ancestors. It shows us what they valued, what they feared, and how they viewed the relationship between the individual and the state. It reminds us that the thin veneer of civilization we enjoy today was built on a long and often very dark history of trial and error. In many ways, the shift away from these public spectacles of gore was a shift in how we view the human body. In the ancient world, the body was often seen as a vessel for the soul or a tool for the state. Today, we view the body as an autonomous entity with inherent rights. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years and the rise of new philosophies and scientific understandings. But even as we moved away from the more physical punishments, the memory of them lingers in our culture. We see echoes of the brazen bull in our horror stories, and the concept of the ordeal survives in our language when we describe a difficult experience. These ancient civilizations may be gone, their cities buried under sand or modern skyscrapers, but the lessons they learned about human nature and the darker side of authority remain as relevant as ever. The history of punishment is also a history of resistance. For every person who faced the bog or the bull, there were others who questioned the fairness of the laws. There were poets who wrote about the injustice of tyrants and philosophers who argued for a more rational approach to crime. The evolution of our legal systems is a testament to the ongoing conversation between those in power and those they govern. It is a story of how we have slowly, painfully, tried to find a better way to live together without resorting to the darkest corners of our imagination. As the sun sets on our journey through the annals of ancient justice, we are left with a deeper understanding of where we came from. We see a world where the stakes were impossibly high, where every action had a reaction, and where the line between life and something much worse was often as thin as a whisper. These civilizations built the foundations of our world, but they also left behind a warning of what can happen when power is left unchecked and the human mind is allowed to wander into the shadows. It's a reminder to appreciate the progress we've made and to remain vigilant about the systems of justice we continue to build today. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the ways we treat the least among us and the ways we define justice are the true measures of any civilization. The ancient world was a place of incredible light and profound darkness, a world that shaped us in ways we are still discovering. And while we may never fully understand the minds of those who designed the brazen bull or the boats of Persia, we can at least learn from their legacy and strive for a world where such things remain firmly in the past. We have traveled from the riverbanks of the Tigris and Euphrates to the volcanic peaks of the Aztec Empire, and from the frozen fjords of the north to the lush jungles of Asia. In every corner of the globe, the story is the same: the search for order in a chaotic world. Sometimes that search led to the heights of philosophy and art, and sometimes it led to the depths of the executioner's pit. Both are parts of our story as humans. Both are threads in the tapestry of our shared history. As listeners and students of history, it is our job to look at these difficult truths and try to understand the why behind the what. It isn't just about the shock value. It's about the deep-seated human need for meaning, even in our darkest acts. It's about how we define what is right and wrong, and what we are willing to do to uphold those definitions. The next time you look at an ancient artifact in a museum or see a photo of a crumbly ruin, remember that those stones once witnessed a world very different from our own. They witnessed the birth of laws, the rise of kings, and the final moments of those who dared to defy the order of the day. They are silent witnesses to a time when justice was a spectacle, and the body was the canvas upon which the law was written. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the most intense and gruesome punishments of the ancient world. It's a journey that takes us to the very edge of human experience, reminding us of the fragility of our existence and the power of our collective history. Until next time, Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never forget the long road we've traveled to get to where we are today. The past is never truly dead. It's just waiting to be understood, one story at a time. Reflecting on the sheer variety of these methods, from the mechanical ingenuity of the Greeks to the spiritual convictions of the Egyptians, we see that punishment was never just about suffering. It was a language. It was a way for a society to communicate its most deeply held beliefs about life, the afterlife, and the role of the individual. In Rome, the punishment was often as grand as their architecture. In the Norse lands, it was as raw and uncompromising as the landscape. In China, it was as meticulous and structured as their bureaucracy. This connection between culture and consequence is what makes history so fascinating. We can tell a lot about what a civilization loved by looking at what they hated. We can tell what they feared by looking at how they tried to prevent it. These methods, as horrifying as they are, provide a window into the souls of our ancestors. They show us a people who were trying in their own way to make sense of a world that was often cruel, unpredictable, and dangerous. By facing these stories, we don't just learn about the end of lives, we learn about the life of societies. We learn how they organized themselves, how they protected their people, and where they drew the lines. We learn about the inventors, the leaders, and the common people who lived in the shadow of these laws. And most importantly, we learn to value the empathy and the reason that have become the hallmarks of our own time. So, as we close the book on this chapter of human history, let's take a moment to be grateful for the evolution of thought that turned the public square into a place for community, rather than a place for the ultimate penalty. The journey of humanity is a long one, marked by incredible achievements and regrettable mistakes. By understanding both, we become better equipped to navigate the future and to ensure that the darkest parts of our history remain exactly where they belong in the past. History is a teacher, and its lessons are often written in the most difficult of circumstances. But by listening, we honor the memory of all those who came before us, and we commit ourselves to a journey that continues to move toward a more compassionate and understanding world. The ancient world was a place of wonder and terror, and it's by exploring both that we truly understand what it means to be human. Through the sands of time, the echoes of those ancient squares and colosseums still reach us. They remind us that the quest for justice is as old as civilization itself. It is a quest that has taken many forms, some of which we can barely recognize today. But at its heart, it has always been about the same thing: trying to create a world where we can live together, work together, and build a future for those who come after us. The path hasn't always been straight, and it hasn't always been kind, but it is the path that brought us here. And that is a story worth telling.